No, I just the biggest thing I gotta focus is like just saying like that's such a ugh. Yeah, right. Like, so we've had our nice little introduction and with our podcast with being a friend of sinners, and we've talked a little bit about Jesus, a little bit about him being a friend, and so I wanted us to kind of focus maybe more on sin and us being the sinners in that group. And so I'd love to just kind of open up that introduction and for us that conversation to maybe talk about who Jesus is being a friend to, who he is approaching or wanting to open that relationship with. So let's kind of just maybe talk about, like, we got the idea of maybe a sinner, but maybe let's just first go back to basics. Like, what do you guys think about what sin is? Or let's just talk about what is sin?
Get it, Pastor.
I want to hear you first.
I was thought of sin is, I guess I originally thought sin is just doing something bad, but sin is doing anything you know you shouldn't do that you do, or anything that goes against the will of God.
Yeah, I used to follow, like, as far as thinking sin is more of this, like, I'm this good person, but I occasionally make this mistake, or like sin as the only difference between me being perfect. And so I used to kind of follow that and think like this is how, or what sin is. But I kind of grown more to thinking like sin as more of an intention to just be like, no, this is what I want. Rather than like, we have this idea of what we should do and what is good, and we just go, no, I want to go for this direction. I want to turn to this. And so that's kind of my little.
Yeah, I think it was I think we talked about before. It's like it's taking these good desires that God has put into us and twisting them to make them our own, or to put us first, as opposed to pointing the glory to God or just living the way that He wants us to.
Yeah, I didn't think about this for the 5 minutes that I thought about this before we did this, but what you were just saying like really reminded me, I forget, and I'm gonna butcher it, and it's probably even the wrong word, but like the original Greek for sin, like in the Bible, is like harmatia or something like that, and it literally means to miss the mark. That's what sin is. It's like, here's the target, and you miss the mark. And so that like is what I know to be is like the most basic understanding. It's like, here's the command, and here's the bullseye, and sin is this way. You miss the bullseye, you miss the mark. Does that make sense? Have you heard that before?
Yeah, and I think people have always described it as that, and like, this is kind of maybe I should like elaborate when we talk about like miss the mark. This is where I kind of used to think that sin was you're aiming this bow and archer, you have this bow and arrow and you're trying to aim at this target, and like sin would be if you just you didn't hit quite accurately enough. But like this is where I just kind of believe that we just, instead of just slightly missing, we just aim somewhere else completely. We're just not even aiming at the right target or at the right direction.
Right.
And so, yeah.
It says all sin is equal though. So like you're saying like, oh, I've only done this, or I'm not that bad, or at least I didn't like murder people or something like that. But in his eyes, like, sin is sin. It's either perfection or not. There's no kind of miss the mark, like you were saying. There's no I kind of miss the bullseye, but I hit the target still. It's just, it's either all or it's nothing. You're completely out.
Yeah. Yeah, like there's one center on that bullseye. Like there's no outer rings of, oh, you did pretty good or whatever. It's like there's just one center thing, and you either are on it or you're off.
Yeah.
And it's like you're either not using good language or you're committing adultery. Both are missing the mark. It's sin. So go ahead.
Right. Well, yeah, I was going to go to. Oh, I missed it. It was. Oh no! I closed out. It was Romans 3:23. I think is what I looked up and then now lost. Oh yeah. It says, for all I looked at that word all in the dictionary. It means all.
Oh, really?
Sound like something.
Most?
For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So that is just
Mm-hmm.
elaborating exactly what we're saying. It's you fall short. Like you
Right.
sinned, well done. You fail.
Yeah.
So what's next?
Yeah, and I think sin is just kind of like a part of us that we just were so inclined to naturally. I don't think anyone has to teach us to sin or like how to like, we kind of like maybe grew into sin. I think it's just so natural to our core, and
Well, baby's first words are like no.
yeah, right, or
Well,
mine,
no,
or
yeah.
it's just like other than dada, maybe mom if you're lucky, but like. Yeah, just I think, and so one thing that I try to maybe look at maybe what some other people who maybe weren't super theological and finding out like what sin is, and so I kind of actually, if you guys know Carl Jung, I know he's kind of has like somewhat of a religious background, but he doesn't necessarily, as far as I know, he doesn't
Claim Christ.
identify or claim,
Yeah.
and so like I kind of have a quote from him. Where he says like, unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, and on whole, less good than he imagines himself or wants to be. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. At all counts, it forms an unconscious snag, thwarting our most well-meant intentions. And I just like that, even like psychology and like they kind of examine, we all just have this this inner desire or this inner like working of just going towards something bad. Like we don't even like, I mean, he doesn't use the word sin, but he describes it as like this shadow, this maybe dark side we have. Kind of reminds me, what was that? There's like that analogy or something, like you have the good and the bad side.
No idea.
Oh, alright. I'm trying to remember.
Like
yeah.
Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah, that's what it was, the Jekyll and Hyde,
Yeah.
where like you have this good persona and then this bad persona at the same time.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking about Romans 1, where he talks about everyone knows God because of his invisible attributes, his eternal power, divine nature, right? Like you can see creation, know that God is real. Everyone is without an excuse because everyone knows God. And then he says this, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and here's what I think like gets to the root of sin. And exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore God gave them up, right? So they exchanged the glory of the immortal, holy God for creation. And so I think it's John Piper who says basically, kind of defines sin as preferring anything over God.
Mm.
And I think that's really like kind of gets to the root of it. It's like you exchange God for a podcast or whatever. Like you treasure anything more than you do God.
Mm.
You delight in anything, you enjoy anything, you prefer anything over God. I think kind of gets to the root of sin.
Yeah.
And we're born that way. This is
Yeah.
my belief. Do you guys believe that?
Yeah, if we're gonna go into the original sin and all that, I think we're just we have this natural in our DNA, and I think like it roots, maybe in a simplifying why we sin might be just because like back where we read about Adam and Eve and just the thing that might have snatched Eve's attention was the fact that the fruit or it had the ability to make oneself wise and like God. And I think we kind of have that nature where we just want to be like God or be God ourselves. And I think that might be why we sin, because we just, ultimately it's like, do I want to do what God is asking me? Or do I want to do what I want to do? We want to be like God, we want to make our own decisions. And so this kind of, I like this little quote from Charles Spurgeon. I just find this kind of interesting, why people might not believe God or why people like have an issue with God. And like the only real argument against the Bible is an unholy life. When a man argues against the word of God, follow him home. and see if you cannot discover the reason of his enmity to the word of the Lord. It lies in some sort of sin. And I think that's such a big deal when some people argue that, like, I don't believe in God because there's not enough evidence, or there's not enough proof, or maybe just like God needs to show himself more. But I think often we have the proof, but it's just if he's real, if God is true and God is God, it's like, then we know the way we live is not the way that he approves. And I think that ultimately is like our stumbling block as far as to acknowledge God, because if we acknowledge him, then why am I walking like this, or why am I doing that?
And nobody wants to feel guilt. Nobody wants to feel like they're doing
Mhm.
something wrong, especially when they enjoy what you're doing. Like, I'm enjoying this. I don't want you to tell me that I'm not supposed to do this.
Yeah, and it's like, sin is enjoyable. Like, we shouldn't, like, say it's not,
Yeah.
right? Like, Dad always says, like, if sin were like canned spinach, nobody would be doing it, right?
Yeah. I love
It's
that.
like, no, there's an enjoyment to it.
Mhm.
Not that that means it's right, but that's reality. And I think as you were talking, and I'm saying this, it's making me think a lot about like the whole idea of like deconstruction, how that's been so like prevalent
Mhm.
over the past, especially since COVID. People just like in droves, it seems, like leaving the church, leaving the faith, it seems. And I think some of that, and who am I to, who cares what I think? But I
I
feel
do.
it. You do. Okay. Thank
We
you,
care.
Josh. Thank you so much.
We and
Um,
our dozen of viewers,
Yes.
or dozens if we're lucky.
At least 3.
I feel like people like they just, I don't know, they've tasted sin and they are preferring that over faith, over God himself. And God is, I mean, I hope he's not for a lot of people, but like giving them over
Mhm.
to their preference
Mm-hmm.
and saying, okay, if this is what you enjoy, then see ya.
Yeah.
And I think like America is a big picture of Romans 1, of God
Yeah.
just giving them over to what they've preferred, the creation over the creator. So just a verse to prove original sin, okay?
Or-
Romans 5:12. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, so death spread to all men, because all sinned. For sin indeed was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not counted where there is no law. So sin came into the world through one man, and it spread. So who hasn't died?
Elijah.
I was trying to remember. Oh, Enoch.
You
right.
guys are smart. You guys are
Right.
You guys are
Oh, and,
biblical.
There's one other guy. And it was like, and he was no more.
Yeah, that's
Something-
Enoch. Yeah,
Enoch,
yeah,
it was
Enoch,
me.
Yeah.
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 Those
All right. So those guys are exceptions.
Yeah, I know.
But everyone else
But everyone has
has
died,
died, right?
Yeah.
We will die. So there's proof in the world through this text of just as sin came into the world through one man, so death spread through that sin.
And I think the important, what I was thinking of when you're saying that is the hardening of the hearts part,
Mhm.
is that people often go to, well, how can a loving God send people to hell?
Mhm.
And it's just because of sin, the choices we're making, we're choosing this path down away from God, and he's like, I want you back constantly, and we just keep saying no, and this is our trajectory, because this is the life that we're choosing. It's like, okay, hell is eternity without God. You don't want God? Okay, there you go. This is what not having God
Yeah.
looks like. This is what you get, and this is what you've been choosing. And I haven't heard it in a while, but I feel like growing up, I'd hear like, "Oh, I'm going to hell. We're gonna have a party in hell." Or whatever.
Right.
And you're like, you have
Yeah.
no idea what hell is then.
Yeah.
I know. I always wonder why, like, we have songs and expressions like, "Yo, party in hell," or "I'll see y'all in hell," and it's like,
Highway to hell.
I don't think we understand quite much. But no, I like where, like,
Sorry.
where our hearts kind of get hardened and all that. And I think there's like a part in the scripture that talks about like where we sear our conscience, and it's like, I think God just kind of gives us, I don't know, like the gift, or maybe just the ability to, like, if we want to walk in sin, he's gonna allow us to do it without feeling really bothered. Because I think like a lot of Christians kind of like maybe project and think like, oh, everyone feels regret in their sin, but like there's a lot of people like who just genuinely feel like in good conscience they can just do whatever they want. And it's just kind of interesting, and I think God like allows us to like sear our conscience so much that like sin doesn't bother us at a certain point. And I think that's a scary point to hit.
It's a dangerous thing.
Um,
I was told that by, I think it was my mom, that was like, you're okay, like you're following God, like the Spirit is in you, when you sin, like you know that it was a sin, like you
Mhm.
know.
She said like
that would be-
or something like that.
That was like growing up, the conscience or the Holy
Yeah.
Spirit was the, if you get an voice,
Yeah, yeah,
like that was us
okay.
growing up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I feel like, what were you just saying though? Like, like people just do it willingly.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's true for sure, and like don't even have like a conscience. But I feel like also, it's true. Well, I know it's true because God's word says like the law of God is written on the
Mhm.
heart of man. So, just as we know it would be wrong to sleep with someone else's spouse,
Mm-hmm.
someone who has never heard of the Bible, doesn't know the name Jesus, who lives in the bush of Africa
Yeah.
in a tribe, that person knows that it's wrong for him to sleep with someone else's wife.
Mm-hmm.
Why
Yeah.
does he know that?
Yeah. and I-
Because of the law of God is written on his heart.
Mhm.
He knows that that's wrong, that that's missing the mark.
Mhm.
And so, like, yeah, there's people I'm sure who are just like, this is fine. I don't find any wrong, but
But that's because they
know.
they get there after a while.
Yeah,
it's not like
they're
you
hardened,
just
like
get
you're
saying.
there. It was
Right.
Yeah. No, what I was saying is like, yeah, as far as like, I think you kind of keep hardening yourself to a point that like, you just don't feel bad about doing this. You know, like maybe and I think it's interesting because like you bring up like people who never heard of God or the Bible. Like, I think a lot of atheists have pretty good consciences. Like they really don't do that many bad things. Like generally, because I think like we all were born with that, where we just like we kind of hear that we don't know who it's from or where it comes from, but I think we all kind of maybe inherently are born with that. I just think we can kind of screw that up over time.
Well, so the verse is Psalm 1:1. Yeah, Psalm 1:1.
Mm-hmm.
Is blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked. So it's a progression. So
Oh,
you
yeah.
even said the word walking. So you're blessed is one who does not walk in step with the wicked. So I envision this as like you see something at a distance and you just want to check it out. So you're just gonna start walking that way, and you start walking with the crowd, and you're like, just checking it out. I'm not really participating yet. Then it's does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take. So you've gone from a motion of you can keep going, like you can pass, but then you've stopped. Like you're where you're at. You're like, I kind of want to see where this goes. I want to see where this planes out.
Yeah.
And then, or sit in the company of mockers. It goes from walking to standing to sitting, and then you're in that. Like now you're a part of that.
Yeah.
Like you had the chance, so it's the
Yeah.
you never imagine you're gonna end up where you are. The people that are like, it's okay to sleep with someone else's wife, they didn't just wake up that way
Yeah.
one day and like, yeah, that's totally fine. Like that's a progression
Yeah.
of getting to that point. Like
What is it? Walking?
walking, standing, sitting.
Yeah, that's good.
Mhm.
Something
Yeah.
that was really difficult for me was first reading through Exodus about Pharaoh and stuff. So you go through all the plagues and stuff.
Yeah.
And then at the end of it, it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Like,
Yeah.
Mhm.
you will not get saved. And that was really difficult for me. Like, how could God make him not, like, that's the end all. You are going to hell. Like, you're destined now. Like, how is he, like, how is that a good thing? Like, I get the after effects because of this, because he got to save all the people. We got to see these miracles. Like, so many people come to know God because of it. I get that. But for him, that was really difficult. My finite brain's like, but what if he changed afterwards? What if, but something that that's really helped me, that kind of clicked lately, was that if God is outside of time and space, that even Revelation, which is the future for us, is still a history book for him. because he
Mhm.
sees everything as now. He is I am, as in current.
Mm-hmm.
So that Pharaoh was never going to turn, he knew that because he's outside of time. He doesn't see the
Mhm.
he saw the whole thing beginning to end. And
Yeah.
so he's like, this is what he wanted, this is what he gets. And so that was really helpful for me to see the big picture
Yeah.
looking down, kind of.
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of like an interesting conversation I had with someone as far as like, I mean, this is getting into the topic of like predestination and stuff. Is like, did God just choose, or did He know at the end, you know, who would be at that finish line? And so I just kind of like, that was a pretty interesting little discussion, because you say like God's kind of outside of time, so it's like He's not shocked to find out what happens 100 or 1,000 years later. It's like He's already, like He's seeing that right now, I guess. Which is pretty interesting of a concept, or kind of interesting of a, I guess, perspective.
Mhm.
So, yeah, for sure.
I just thought of this. I feel like it's an important text with this topic. James 1:13. Let no one say when he's tempted, I'm being tempted by God, for God can't be tempted with evil, and He Himself tempts no one, but each person, so each one of us, is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. There's that original sin, right?
Yeah.
That we're born with it. When he's lured and enticed by his own desire, then desire, when it's conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's fully grown, brings forth death. I feel like that's a pretty good understanding of death, like just the desire that we're enticed by and tempted by, when it has conceived and gives birth to sin.
Yeah. I like that it says, like, maybe not like, but like, just, I kind of noticed that it says, when we're drawn away by our own desires. Like,
Yeah.
Satan doesn't pull us away, you know, from God. It's like, no, we just, he kind of dangles the carrot, but like, that's what we want. Like, you know, he just kind of puts it in show in front of you, you know, and, you know, he puts the bait there, but like, we ultimately just, we choose and we kind of go astray because it's what we want. It's our own desire that leads us to that sin.
What do you guys, I'm going to throw something out here. What do you guys, like, what would you say, like, what we're talking about is so unpopular.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is, like, outdated, old school stuff. Like, people, sin is not talked about,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some churches don't talk about it.
Yeah.
But, so, like, what would you say to someone who's just, like, sin? Like, come on, like, what are you, 80? You know,
Mhm.
like...
Yeah. So what I love, because like, I think we kind of love the title and the tag of Jesus being gracious and loving, and we kind of shuffle aside what sin is. But like, one thing that just draws me to God and why I love like even Friend of Sinners is because with sin, with that depravity, knowing like full well how messed up and we are and how like jacked up we are inside, I think it's that much more of a sweet, bitter sweetness that like God loves that. He loves those people who are messed up, who are like, in a sense, helpless. Like we don't know what to do with ourselves and, you know, how to act and how to walk. And so I used to shy away from sin, but I think like just knowing what sin is and knowing how that plays a key role in our hearts and how central that is to our core, I think it's just that much more amazing to know that God comes for us who are in that mess. So I don't feel so much afraid of it anymore, but I do understand why it's such a hard topic, and you know, it feels like that fire and brimstone preaching, you know?
Yeah,
What are we,
so like,
are we back in the 1900s?
Like, dude, come on, Andrew, it's what is sin? Like,
Yeah.
what do you say? Like,
I'd say you already know what sin is, you just might call it a different word.
yeah,
Like,
Okay.
it's just a white lie.
a mistake.
It's just a mistake. I just messed up.
A boo-boo.
I stumbled.
Mhm.
Stumbled, or I'm struggling with this. We as maybe just as a society, we like to soften everything.
Yeah.
Everything is kind of gray.
Everything's feel good.
There's no black and white. If it doesn't make you feel good, then that's wrong. Do what makes you happy.
Right.
And it just goes back to the same thing of like we all know what sin is. You just call it a different word because you don't like that word because that's too straightforward, I guess. And
Maybe they feel threatened,
Yeah.
you know, like, because they do know in their heart of hearts, and there's like that threatening feeling of, oh, this is what this is, you know,
Yeah.
but they don't want to admit to that. I don't know.
Well, kind of like what I read earlier, like it's either you acknowledge like what you're doing is sin and the God is God, then you know what you're doing is wrong completely.
Right.
But we kind of mince it, or we kind of we either put God away or shuffle him away, or what this serious sin is, we kind of put it down as like a mistake, or just like it's not that bad. Like, hey, you know, I know someone else who does something worse. Like, what? Like, this isn't that bad, you know?
Yeah.
I think the people that can't call it sin are the ones generally that will compare it to someone else.
Mhm.
I guess
Mhm.
well, I don't want to call it a sin because that's too straightforward. Is, well, that. At least
Right.
I'm not a crack addict.
Right.
I'm
Right.
only doing this. It was only I brought the white lie. It's only a white lie. It's for their benefit, really.
Yeah.
Um,
But you know, I just am thinking like it's because we desire things so much. I feel like all sin, like Piper said, like preferring whatever, it all kind of flows out of like that first. I'm pretty sure it's first commandment. It's not good if I don't know, but like you shall have no other gods before me.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it's idolatry. It's idolatrous that
Mhm.
we prefer something, and like it's becomes this pet of ours that like we need to protect, and like it's
Mhm.
in our so lodged in our heart that it's like it's our God.
Mhm.
I feel like all sin just like flows out of that.
yeah.
So you know what I read this week actually? This is interesting. This just hit me too. Sorry.
No, go for it.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
So it was Paul Tripp. It's just like this weekly email, but it was on sin,
Mhm.
and he was talking about like we're like leopards, or like a zebra. Like you could shave the fur off of that animal, but their spots are skin deep.
Mm.
Like they're not just like
Yeah.
on their hair, like it's skin deep. So you could shave and it'll grow back out, and you'll see it, and you shave, and like that is us to the core. Like we are spotted leopards.
Mhm.
That like to our core is just sin.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think that just goes right into like it's so deeply engraved in us that like I don't know, we either deny it or we wash it down and think lower it to something that it's not, but that's why I think like it is an essential topic, because like I think it just cheapens grace if sin is not understood or it's not measured up to what it really is. And so I think a lot of people like lack pushing that that heaviness on it, because like without that heaviness, then like what does grace really save us from?
yeah.
Grace, does it really, all it saves me is just from a white lie? Like, okay, great, like that's not a big deal. Until we know, like, holy crap, like God is saving us from this really weird part of me that just wants to do all these bad things, and that just so willingly turns away from Him, and just kind of like, man, we really are messed up. And so, yeah, go ahead if you want to. I was going to read a passage in a little bit. You guys got anything to
Nope.
say?
Go for it.
All right, give me a second. And so yeah, this kind of brings me to like a story, with Jesus and how he addresses or how he looks to sinners, because I think like we think we can only come to Jesus without sin, where we think Jesus, he only like likes us when we're without sin, or when we sin less, then maybe we're more liked by Him, or maybe we're more accepted by Him.
Well, that goes into like people that you invite to church or something like that, and they're like, "Oh, I'm not ready for that. I got to clean myself up."
Mhm.
I'll get struck by
before."
lightning if I walk in.
Oh, yeah. It's like you just don't understand. Like this is your place.
Yeah.
This is the place for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's why I would love to read it. It's a little bit of a longer read, but just I think it catches like the heart of like Jesus knows who comes to Him, and He loves those people. And so this takes place in Luke 7, starting at verse 36. So then one of the Pharisees asked Him to eat with him, and He went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at the table at the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil, and stood at His feet behind Him, weeping. And she began to wash His feet with her tears, and wiped them with the hair of her head. And she kissed His feet, and anointed them with the fragrant oil. Now when the Pharisees who had invited Him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, "This man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what manner of a woman this is who is touching Him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answered and said to Simon, and said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. So he said, Teacher, say it. There was a certain creditor who had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they had nothing with which to repay, he freely forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him more? Simon answered, I suppose the one whom he forgave more. And he said to him, You have rightly judged. Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, Do you see this woman? I entered your house, and you gave me no water for my feet, but she washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. You gave me no kiss, but this woman has not ceased to kiss my feet since I came in. You did not anoint my head with oil, but this woman had anointed my feet with fragrant oil. Therefore I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. Then he said to her, Your sins are forgiven. And those who sat at the table with him began to say to themselves, Who is this who even forgives sin? Then he said to the woman, Your faith has saved you. Go in peace.
I think knowing the weight of it is such a huge thing that we just don't understand. Like you were saying, like people just like, oh, it's just is the word. It's always justify, minimize, and rationalize. The general process of.
That sounds like something you would say about someone who's like an addict. Justify,
Right. Yeah.
rationalize, and
Right.
minimize.
We're
Like,
sin addicts.
I guess that fits for our addiction to sin, I guess.
I think
But what do you
too,
think
like,
about
I'm just thinking of, like, that lady going to Jesus, like, not only, she wasn't just, like, thinking about her sin as, like, it's whatever, like, she wasn't thinking that, like, because of the grace of God being imparted to her, felt like the heaviness of her sin. But more than that, I think, like, she knew he was there, him.
Yeah.
There's something about him that drew this woman to him, to come and break that and to worship really
Yeah.
in that way. And I feel like not only do people just neglect the reality and the heaviness of sin, but more than that, they are missing out on what's available to them. Like they don't know that there is a creator. All they know is creature.
Yeah.
And they've exchanged and they don't know how good and how amazing God is. They have not tasted and seen that the Lord is good, and sold everything in their joy to buy that field where the treasure is, like.
Yeah. You love that parable.
I do.
You always repeat that one.
It's clutch, man.
It's so good. The Pharisees and she is known as the sinner.
Yeah.
Like people already know her for her sinning. Like they just look at her and say, yeah, this is a sinner, all right. And that just kind of makes me think like, who would that be today? And I think like that would be like your typical drug dealer, and you'd think like, this guy's a sinner, man. He's just messed up. What the heck is he doing at church? What the heck is he doing praying? And I think we can think the same thing often, when we see it, like as someone who just is this person who like really is just a messed up bad person.
Yeah.
And I love because like they themselves know they're a sinner. They themselves, like they've been hurt, they've been told by everyone else, you're messed up, you're no good. And I just love that I think that brokenness or that acknowledgement, knowing how much of this debt you owe, and coming to Jesus is like is such a relief when we find out that like all this weight, all this sin is paid. And I love that he brings up that example, like, hey, 2 guys up, one guy owed him 500 and another owed him 50.
Right.
Like, who loves him more? And like, of course, the one who just got saved for 500 out of debt is like, wow, that's a real big debt that I couldn't pay off in any means of a long time. And I think that I love it because it just shows like I don't think that necessarily means like we have to sin more in order to appreciate God. I don't think it means like, okay, in order for me to love God, I first need to get addicted to heroin and I need to start getting into all these crazy things. I think just when we acknowledge how much of our sin is paid, and how deep our sin is, then I think we realize how big of a debt was paid in our hearts or in our lives.
Yeah.
So
It goes back to when, not even just the sinning more or bigger sins, it's when you come to that, the realization where you started with, that the crack addict is the same as the gossiper or the murderer or whatever, like, it's the same.
yeah, we wouldn't.
I love that text. I forget where it is, but it's like listing off all these things of who will not inherit the kingdom of God. It's like the adulterers, the sexually immoral, and like right in the middle, it's like the greedy. And
Yes,
things like
yeah.
that. It's like, yes.
That's First Corinthians 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. It's just, it doesn't seem like that fits in there. It's like, all right, we know the sexually immoral, we know
Yeah.
like the idolaters. Yeah, they're not gonna go to heaven, but the greedy.
Yeah.
And it's
Nobody really
like,
talks about the greedy.
yeah, I'm like, really? Is greedy really that bad? Like,
Yeah, I just want money, I just wanna be successful.
yeah.
And again, like that, so like that goes to like the standard that God has of holiness, that people don't know of. But I feel like too, like we can talk a lot about like, oh, the world, they just don't even know, like what sin really is. Like we're kind of defining it, talking about it, but like, in reality, like that's who Jesus came for. You know, like he didn't come for us perfect church going, you know, Bible Belt people.
Yeah.
He came for the sick. He came for the sinner. I think Dane Ortland said in his book Gentle and Lowly that sin like got him up out of bed in the morning. Like your sin got him up out of bed in the morning to move towards you in his kindness and grace, not your righteousness, because you don't have any. I don't have any, you know. I love that. That's the gospel, right? That's grace. That's the kingdom of God.
Yeah, yeah. And I probably want to close this. I think you know this quote from Martin Luther about sin.
Yeah.
You're like, I mentioned it, he's like, oh, I think I already know.
That's the one, man.
It's a little bit long, but I love it because like now we reconcile, like, okay, we're this really messed up, what do we do with it? You know, okay, I'm a bad person. Like, okay, Andrew, like, what do I do about this? I think when we first acknowledge who Christ came to save, I think when we fit ourselves in that criteria, then we really know who he came for us. And I just love this quote from Martin Luther. It's a little, not too early, it's a couple sentences. So, when the devil accuses us and says, "You are a sinner and therefore damned," we should answer, "Because you say I am a sinner, I will be righteous and saved." "No," says the devil, "you will be damned." And I reply, "No, for I fly to Christ who gave himself for my sins. Satan, you will not prevail against me when you try to terrify me by setting forth the greatness of my sins and trying to bring me to heaviness, distrust, despair, hatred, contempt, and blasphemy against God. On the contrary, when you say I am a sinner, you give me armor and weapons against yourself, so that with your own sword I may cut your throat and tread you under my feet. For Christ died for sinners. As often as you object that I am a sinner, so often you remind me of the benefit of Christ my Redeemer, on whose shoulder and not on mine lies all my sin. So when you say I am a sinner, you do not terrify me, but comfort me immeasurably." And I love that one because
That's the best.
I think sometimes we get so held up in like, I'm a sinner, I'm this messed up person, man, I'm just not good enough to be for God. But I just love that that's literally the reason why he's here. That's why he had to die. That's why he came on this earth. Because if we could have pulled ourselves together, he wouldn't need to, like, the law would have been good enough, and some of us would have been good enough to get to heaven. But it's like, none of you can do this, so I'm stepping in.
I love
Yeah.
this little story thing. It was like this guy dies and he goes up.
Sounds great.
Yeah, that's it. This guy dies and he goes up to the pearly gates and there's like the ticket counter up front and he's like, he walks up and the teller's like, "All right, so how do you get in?" And he's like, "What good things have you done?" And he's like, "Well, you know, I started an orphanage." And he's like, "Cool." He's like, you get like 10 points. He's like, "Okay, how many points do I need to get in?" It's like, "Well, 1,000,000. It's like, 10 points? How am I supposed to get up to 1,000,000? It's like, "Well, what else have you done?" He's like, well, I walked an old lady across the street. He's like, all right, that's like a point. All right, well, I did this and this and this, and he's like, yeah, well, that's great. You got like 100 points now. He's like, how does anybody get in? He's like, only by the grace of God could I get in. And he's
Yeah.
like, exactly. Go on in.
No, that's cool. It's a good story.
Yeah. So yeah, I love to just, I think we can end it on this, and I think I just want to always encourage, especially you guys viewing, and even some of us, just like, this is who Jesus is coming here for. It's for us in our messiness and our mistakes, and I think we should kind of acknowledge, and I think this is what I want to have this podcast for, is to kind of dismantle this idea that we need this holiness to ourselves, we need this right act, this right thought, and I think we can come to Him and just know who Jesus is so much more valuable than all the act that we can put together. All the points we can accumulate in our lives, all the orphanages we can build, and all the homeless people we can feed. I think we just need to know who God is and His grace and how and who He's here for. So.
Well, that's so good, and I feel like it's because like Jesus is so misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
Like the real Jesus needs to be known. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you started this.
Yeah, and so again, he's a friend of sinners, not a friend of the most righteous people, and he's not here to just look at all the righteous people and hey, be like them. He's just here to just like again, he's like a physician. He's came to the sick and to the weak, and so I'd love to open up more with this podcast, just kind of sharing what that looks like, and so thank you guys so much for listening and for viewing us, and I'd love for you guys to we maybe comment, like, share, subscribe, just share this with someone else, just because I love the idea of who this Jesus is, and I would love for more for the church and more for us to really share who He is. And I think if you find this helpful, like I would love more people to know about this. So thank you guys. We'll hope to see you around next time, and you have a wonderful evening.
So, see ya.